you know what they say about guys who drive big trucks. We're doing something new today. I don't know what to expect either, so let's get into it. This is my 1982 Volkswagen Rabbit pick-em-up truck. If you were here for that video, you've been introduced to this particular nugget. We don't talk about the yellow one anymore. Anyways, it does occur to me that you may not be as cool as me. You may not be as well versed on the Volkswagen Mk1 platform as me. And it's very hard to find someone to info dump on these days, and you've already clicked on the video. So how about a history lesson today? But don't worry, not just a history lesson, there are some fun things we'll get to later. But last time I did mention I'd be road tripping this thing to an event later. It is now later. So I suppose instead of standing here and doing a video essay, I'll get on the road and we'll learn some things along the way. So a brief history of this here automobile. I suppose we'll start at the beginning. So there is evidence as far back as 5000 BC of pottery wheels being used. But it wasn't till around 3500 BC when Mesopotamian farmers discovered that a wooden disc with a hole in the middle riding on an axle could make it a lot easier to move some heavy stuff around. On second thought, that might be too far back. Suppose we'll jump ahead a few years. So Volkswagen, we can't talk about Volkswagen without talking about the Beetle. And I would like to clear some things up first. Mustache Man called his car the Beetle. But Mustache Man's car was never a Volkswagen, and Volkswagen never made a Beetle. So Hitler's car, the Kraftdeutsche or the Car of Strength Through Joy, what a name, that was basically nothing more than a grift. It's a rather long story, but basically he promised everyone that through making many monthly payments, they would eventually get a car. But no one got a car, and Poland got invaded. It was basically just an excuse to take people's money and build factories for war machines. Volkswagen itself was founded by the Allies after the war to help rebuild Germany's economy. So as mentioned, the Kraftdeutsche the KDF wagon, never actually entered production, but there were prototypes. So mainly under the control of the British, Volkswagen basically just started making a production version of the KDF wagon and called it the Type 1. It was just known colloquially as the Beetle for obvious reasons. And it was a people's car that actually existed and wasn't a Nazi scam. Although I feel like they could have worked the people's car thing into the name. So fast forward to the mid-1950s and Volkswagen is selling an absurd number of Type 1s. But it's still a 1930s design and it's starting to show its age. So they're trying to cook something up to replace it. There's a ton of cool prototypes you can find from this era, like the EA53, a mid-engine hatchback developed by Porsche. Or the EA158 designed by Pininfarina. Very cool. And a lot of these designs showed some promise. So much promise, in fact, that they kept getting distracted and just started making new cars to sell alongside the Beetle. And pretty much all of which the Beetle would end up outliving, so that's fun. So this trundled along into the early 1970s when sales of the Type 1 finally started to fall off. And at this point, management decided it was time to get serious about making a new car. And now I'll skip some boring details to get to the fun part. Giorgetto Giugiaro. Oh, you don't know him? Yes, you do. He designed this, and 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 this. Also, if you've seen this image before, that's our boy. He liked flat and square or his folded paper design, which I think is absolutely delightful when it's done tastefully. Anyways, he drew a car, Volkswagen made it, it entered production in 1974 as the Type 17, although it did lose Giugiaro's square headlights in its way to production. They called this new model Golf, either after the sport, the Gulfstream Wind, in German Golfstrom, or horse, I guess. Nobody seems to know. And of course, there's a ton of submodels and trims and engine options I could continue to read off the Wikipedia page, but I'm going to focus on the history as it pertains to my automobile, although I can't not mention the GTI. The GTI, of course, being the grandfather of every hot hatch we've seen since. Now, funny enough, the GTI started as a Volkswagen Skunk Works project that management didn't even want. But through much pestering from aforementioned Skunk Works, it finally entered production in 1976, and Volkswagen didn't think they'd even sell 5,000 of these spicy little nuggets. But, that's how that went. Anyways, hey, the US, that's a big market. Why not sell some cars there? The first Golfs came to the States for the 1976 model year, as we know, being renamed to the Rabbit. Anyways, for 1976 and 1977, all the Mark 1s sold in the States were still built in Wolfsburg. And they have a bunch of quirky little details about them that make them special. They're quite the rare sight anymore. Anyways, shipping and taxes on all those cars was a bit expensive, so Volkswagen was shopping around for a place to build them in the US. Conveniently, this was right after the American oil crisis, and Chrysler had just abandoned a nearly complete factory in Pennsylvania. Here, well, there, in Westmoreland County, just southeast of Pittsburgh. It's something different now. Just imagine some cool drone shots. I can't afford that yet. But at one time, this building was Volkswagen of America's Westmoreland Assembly Plant. Volkswagen refitted the building and started building the Rabbit here in 1978, but not before, making it much worse for the American market. One executive called it Malibuing, which included changes like more interior colors, softer suspension, US spec bumpers, and of course, rectangular sealed beam headlights. All of which, of course, made the car worse. But hey, Giugiaro finally got his square headlights, even more squares later in 1982 with the facelift. Anyways, all that means if you wanted a German-built Mark 1 in the US, your only options were a 1976 or a 77. Or just get a Jetta, because they never made Jettas here for some reason. All those were built in Wolfsburg and later in Mexico, but never here. Fun fact, when Volkswagen left here in 1988, all of that tooling went to China, where they kept building the Mark II Jetta until 2013. Even though they never made Jettas with that tooling. I don't know, don't think about it too much. Anyways, back to my special little boy. Since Volkswagen was building them here, they figured they'd capitalize on the US's love for pick-em-up trucks. So they developed this, the Rabbit pickup. It was for the US market, but of course they ended up getting sold all over the world. In most markets, it was called the Golf Caddy. Anyways, these were built here until 1984 when they retooled the place to start making the Mark II. They never made them in Mexico for some reason. So that's more or less the story of the Mark I in the US, at least. It starts and ends here for the most part. And of course there's thousands and thousands of trims and specs and options and variants, but I'm not going to pretend either of us is going to remember any of those. So just Google it if you want. And there used to be a big Volkswagen marquee around here somewhere. I wouldn't expect the Volkswagen logo to still be there, but I was hoping to at least find the door where it used to be, but no luck. And as mentioned, production of the Mark I ended in most of the world in 1984, but there were a few markets that kept making them, like the King Jetta in China that I mentioned. There was also the City Golf in South Africa and the European Caddy, which was built in Bosnia until 1992. And then, of course, there's the Cabriolet, which was built for most markets until 1992, because designing a new convertible is expensive. That was well into the production years of the Mark II, so it is a bit strange that there were basically two generations of the same car in production at the same time for the same market. But remember, they did the same thing for the Mark III until 2003. Speaking of 2003, I couldn't think of an appropriate segue, but we're here now. You may notice pulling in there is a slightly higher concentration of Mark 1s than in your day-to-day traffic. This is Mk1 Madness, an annual event here in Moton, Pennsylvania. It's half car show, half car meet, half camping event, 3 halves. There is also a special guest here, but I think I have talked about that thing enough on the channel. So instead, would you care for a montage? So as always, Mk1 Madness was a delight. I, for one, very much enjoyed my luxurious sleeping accommodations. A big thank you to Lord Escher for putting the event together every year. We love you very much. Now, just to make the 4-hour drive back in the other direction, I glossed over it before, I'm going to gloss over it again. I've put about 40,000 miles on this rig since I put it together, and they have been 40,000 very uneventful miles. But since we'll be getting back on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, I figured we'll talk a little bit about what it's like to drive a 50 horsepower sardine can on the modern American interstate highway system. I feel like I don't need to tell you it's slow, but it's also small and loud. Now, to be fair, it's not like Tony slow. It'll do 100 Ks just fine, although 110 is about the practical limit. It just takes a while to get there, and it'll get a bit smoky on the hills if I don't anticipate them well enough. But we usually have truck lanes around here, so I'll get some of that. As for the small part, it's only really an issue because I'm in the US, and our average everyday pickup trucks are the size of small cathedrals. So I have to be a bit more alert and attentive. It can be a bit spooky at times. But funny enough, here in the same place where our small trucks are gigantic, our big trucks are also kind of tiny. They've been about the same size since 1978, and they can only pull a half or even a third of what they can in other more developed countries. That's a tangent for a different video, though. But speaking of trucks, according to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, this is a truck. Even though my gross weight is about half that of the lower end of the lightest class, I still have to pay a little more for my registration every year. As for the loud part, you'll notice I'm recording all of this before I get on the highway and using the highway clips as B-roll, and it still doesn't sound very good. That should be telling. I did do sound deadening in here, but I can still only just hear the stereo because of the little kickers in the dash pointed directly at my face. Now to just accept that the only thing I will be passing is a service station, and that this 4-hour drive is going to take about 5. So at the end of the day, did it replace the Beetle? Kinda. They still made the Beetle until 2003 in Mexico just because they liked them so much. But for most of the world, the Mk1 platform did indeed replace the Beetle. And since this is a new format for me, I have only just started to review what I have said, and I forgot a couple things, so here those are. It's not technically a Mk1. Volkswagen never called it a Mk1. This is the A1 platform. The Golf and Jettas have always been built on the A platform, this being an A1, a Mark II being an A2, and so on. Also in the montage of Madness, you may have noticed this thing. That is a Grumman Cub van, the successor to the ubiquitous American Grumman LLV, a postal vehicle. They are essentially one of these underneath with a 1.6 diesel. The United States Postal Service just wanted something a bit bigger, so there were only about 500 of those made. There were also a bunch of Scirocco's that I forgot to mention entirely. Both generations of Scirocco were built on the A1 platform, so although there are two separate generations, they are both technically Mark Is. And those extra rare 76 and 77 model year rabbits I mentioned, they are colloquially known as swallowtails for this little contour line by the license plate. And all Mark I hatchbacks had that, plus a slightly different hood, some different interior bits, and some different trim bits until 1978. But since we only had them for those 2 years here in the States, that makes them extra rare. Anyways, I think that's about it. I do hope you enjoyed this slightly new format. I would like to do more stuff like this going forward, but I guess I gotta get good at it first. And a big thank you to Vaughn for those drone shots I used in the montage. Here's his Instagram handle if you want to check him out. Also, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. I do love you guys. Maybe head over there if you'd like to see some random sporadic behind the beans content. And finally, if you like what I'm doing here, maybe hit subscribe, click bell, leave a hateful comment and all that. I do appreciate it. But this has been Baked Beans Garage. I am Chinchilla, and I will see you next time.